Hi there, I'm Michelle the Painter from Berkshire Paint and Sip, and this is Paint and Sip at Home. Alright, so today I'm going to be painting Love Letter, and I'm going to be sipping on a little bit of Merlot. And if you do enjoy this video, I hope that you like and subscribe to my channel, and that you also check out my Patreon page where you'll find additional painting perks. So let's get painting and let's get sipping. Alright, so for my materials today, I'm going to be using a stretched and primed 16 by 20 inch canvas. If you're painting along, you can certainly switch up the size, but that's what I'll be using. I will be using acrylic paint today. My colors are titanium white, purple violet, burnt umber, which I'll call brown, Mars black, fire red, and deep yellow. And of course you can switch up those colors if you like, but that's what I'll be using. For my tools today, I have a standard number 2 pencil, and I have 3 brushes. I have a 1/2 inch wide flat bristle brush, I have a number 8 round brush, and a number 1 round brush, and I will refer to these as small, medium, and large as we go through the painting process. And if you're painting along with me, you'll probably want to have a cup of water for washing your brushes, as well as a paper towel for drying your brushes. And down below this video, I will be providing you with a couple of additional resources that can help you through your painting process. One of them is a link where you can purchase the same exact paint kit that I'm using with the same type of paint and brushes and all that good stuff. So that's down there. There's also a link that you can download a free image of the final painting. So you can print that and use it as visual reference as you go through the painting process. And there's also written step-by-step instructions down there for you as well. And that's all we're going to need today. Alright, so what I'm going to do for my first step is I am doing an outline of the scrolled piece of paper. So I'm going to be using my pencil, and we're not going to do the entire detail of it right now. We're just going to give it a basic shape for the outline. So I'm going to give you a couple of markers, and we're going to kind of connect the dots, and we will do a little free-form drawing as well. So the first mark that I'm going to have you make is about the center of your canvas. You're going to come down about, I would say, 2.5 inches or so. Just make yourself a little bit of a marker. That's about as tall as we want the top portion to be. It's going to go over to the right a little bit, but that'll give you a good gauge as to saving some space up at the top. Then over on the left hand side, I'm going to come in maybe about 1.5 inches from the left hand side, and I'm down a little bit lower than here. And I'm going to make myself another mark, so maybe about 4 inches down. And then I'm going to make myself one more mark. It's going to be a little bit kind of diagonal from here in through here. So this is just going to kind of give us a couple of marks that we will hit in a moment. I'm going to come a little bit to the right of here, and then straight down somewhere around here. This is going to be the bottom of my side scroll that we're going to be making. Again, this is just giving you kind of like a marker where to stop. So what I'm going to do is I am going to be connecting this dot. I'm going to come up like this, around in a kind of a swirl like that. I'm going to come down in through here, out to the left of here, and then I'm going to bring this right about into this vicinity. So that's going to be the first mark that I make. I'm going to start in through here, and this does not have to be perfect. We're going to be making the edges jagged anyways in a little bit, but just so we can have a place to start. And I'm going to bring it about as high as here, just so you kind of get an idea of how high I'm making this little scroll mark. And then I'm going to come over in through this vicinity, and I've got it coming way, way far down. When I come and bring it out here, I'm going to bring it out about as far as I have the top one. So somewhere in this vicinity, and then it's going to curl around and hit my marker down here. And then what I'm going to do is from this marker, I'm going to finish a the scrolly kind of mark that I'll be making. So something like that. So you've got almost equal look from the top to the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is about mid-range from here, I'm going to come over to the right-hand side. So I'm just going to kind of travel over to the right-hand side till I'm about, I would say, a third or a quarter of the way from the right-hand side. I'm making myself a little bit of a mark in through here. I'm going to connect this corner to here with a little bit of an arcing motion. Something like this. Like that. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to travel over from the right. So you're going to kind of eyeball here, go over to the right like this till you're about a little bit shy of that, and go up a little bit. So you want to be slightly higher than here and almost as far over to the right as there. So you're going to be right about in through here. And then I'm going to connect here to here with a slightly arcing line. Very, very slight. It does not have to be anything very dramatic. And if you miss your mark like I did, just bring this up a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these two with a little bit of a curved line over in through there. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to come in from here, maybe I would say about an inch or so, and travel up, up, up and away. You could even go a little bit farther in, but that's about good. And you're going to be about at this height in through here. Make yourself a little bit of a mark, and then just connect these two like this. And now you're going to connect here to, I would say maybe about an inch in through here with a similar curve that you have in through here. So I'm just going to kind of watch this curve, make myself a similar one over on this side. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just something that is similar in nature. It doesn't have to be very, very, exact. And we just got I think one more line to make. We're going to take this and just give yourself a horizontal line in through here. So the goal here is you want to have this all closed off at this point. And then we're going to be using our large brush for the next step. So you can put your pencil away, take out your large brush, and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we're painting our background. I'm going to be using my large bristle brush, and the colors that I am using are purple, brown, and white. So I really want this to have like a romantic feel to it. So for me, purple and red really kind of speaks into that love like language. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using purple as my background, but I don't want it to be really vibrant and take away from my focal point. So I'm going to dull it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the purple that I have, and I'm going to be using brown, a good amount of brown, and a touch of white. And the reason why I'm going to be using white in my mixture is because I know that the paint I am using is very translucent, so you can really see through it. So I want to make sure that I have a little bit better opacity to it, so adding a tiny bit of white to it will help you with that. And I'm going for a nice warm purple, and you can tweak yours into whatever value that you want, or maybe you want yours really, really vibrant or darker. Maybe you want to add a little black to it or a little red to it, and that'll make it look more of like a maroon type color. So wherever your visual preference is, feel free to make your color that way. This is the color that I'm going to be making. And I do also know that my paint will turn out a little bit darker when it dries than when it's wet. So I'm also visually planning for that as well. And then once I've got the color that I want, I think I want a little bit more brown in mine. Once I get the color that I want, I'm going to just be painting a base coat or a flat coat of this purple, this nice warm purple, on my background. So I'm thinking this background is a nice wall / table or something of that nature. We're not going to really have much of a delineation between the wall and the table, but I'm going to just go for a nice dark, romantic kind of color. So I've got myself this beautiful dark purple, a nice warm color. And I most likely will end up doing at least 2 layers on my background. If you find that your paint is nice and thick and it gives you good coverage, you may not need to or want to do a second coat, but I know that mine is going to be pretty darn see-through, and I'm going to have evidence of brush strokes within my paint on this first go around. So I will get this first coat on. I'm going to let it dry or dry it with a blow dryer, and then I will do a second coat to it. So that way I'll get a nice even coverage. But using these darker colors and a firm bristle brush, which is what I'm using, it does tend to provide kind of the look of your brush stroke. You can really see your brush stroke within it, especially since I haven't used a lot of white in my mixture. So that's why I will end up doing a second coat. And knowing that I'm doing a second coat, I'm not terribly concerned how awesome the first coat looks. I am trying to keep my paint of equal thickness, so I have a nice consistent layer to it, but I'm okay if my paint strokes go in different directions, again, because I know that I'll be using a second layer on top of this, so that way once I get that second layer on, you won't be able to detect my brush strokes anymore. So I'm just kind of going right around my piece of paper, and if you bump into it a little bit, that is quite all right, because we're going to have lots of details and stuff that are going to be filling in those edges. And if you want, you can paint the edges of your canvas along the sides too. That provides for a nice finished look on your paintings. A lot of people will do that if they don't plan on putting a frame around their canvas after they're done painting. It provides you with that nice finished edge to the painting. So a lot of people will paint the edges of their canvas. I am one of those people who normally does as well. So if you want those edges to look nice and complete, feel free to paint those. And then again, once you've got this first coat on, if you feel that you want a second coat, feel free to just dry your canvas or wait for it to dry and add a second coat. And then once you've got that done, we are going to be utilizing this same brush for the next step, so you can just get ready. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we're doing the first layer of our paper. I'm going to be using my large bristle brush, and the colors that I'm using are brown, yellow, and white. And I'm going to pre-mix myself like a tan color, which will be the base coat for this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go for something in this vicinity. It's got a little bit of yellow, a little bit of brown, and a little bit of white, and I'm just going to spin it together until I've got something that is almost like a light gold, like the metallic gold kind of color. So somewhere in this vicinity is where I'm going. You just want to make sure that you are mixing enough that you'll have plenty for the rest of for that entire area. So even if you've got to, mix a little bit more than you think you need, it would be wise to just mix a good amount in through here. So once you've got the desired color, and again, just plan for it to get a little bit darker as it dries. So if you like the color that you see here, and that's the color that you want the paper to be, you might want to make it a little bit lighter than that in order for it to dry in the tone that you'd like it to. And then once you've got your color that you'd like, I think this is pretty good for me. I'm going somewhere in this vicinity. I'm just going to take it and I'm going to paint in this entire area. What may happen is you may lose this line and this line and this line in through here. And that's okay if you do, because what will happen is you will still have your visual marker of these like this corner and this line in through here. So if you lose it, don't worry. If you want to leave a little space, you can certainly do that. I know that my paint is a little bit see-through, so I'm still going to be able to see, well, I can see this one. I can't really see the top one, but if you can see it, great. If you can't, no worries. You just kind of know that I will guide you when the time comes to get your to get those markers back in the right place. So I'm just mixing myself a little bit more paint. Not quite sure if I had enough on my palette, but I want to make sure that I do now. And then there's no special brush stroke involved here. We are going to be doing another layer on top of this with the highlights and the shadows, and we're going to be doing some rough edges to it. So don't feel like it has to be perfect at this point. You do want to make sure that you bring it all the way to your background. So just make sure that you've got no unpainted area between your background and your piece of paper. So I'm going to bring this right up to those edges. And again, it doesn't have to be a perfect line because we're going to be making it rough anyways in a little bit. So just know that that's going to happen as well. So I'm just going to kind of continue on my little journey in through here. And once we have this step done, we're going to switch brushes to our medium brush. So I'm going to, again, just bring this all the way up here. I'm going to just make sure this corner up here is curved. So just making sure that that remains in a curved fashion. And then once I've got this done, again, I'm just kind of getting the paint on here, not doing anything really special with this. I'm going to make sure this corner kind of stays curved too, just making sure that I've got my paint all the way to the edge of where my background sits. And so I go a little bit slower when it comes to these smaller little detail areas of the exterior, just so I can not get too far out of my lines. And I'm just gonna make sure I go all the way to the edge. That looks pretty good. Make sure I have a nice good coverage. You most likely will not need to do a second coat with this particular paint mixture because you've got a lot of white within the mixture, so that makes it so it's not so see-through. And then I'm just going to kind of finish up down here. And then again, we're going to utilize our medium brush for the next steps. So once you've got this done, you can put your large brush away in your water cup. Almost done here. And just making sure I go all the way down to the edges here. I would say if you were concerned about having a clean edge to this piece of paper, it'd probably be where it rolls. So like the bottom edge here, as well as the top edge over there. But all the edges on the sides, they definitely don't need to be nice and clean. They can have some roughness to them. So as you're doing this, if you do feel like you want it to be nice and smooth at some point, it would just be where it rolls. And then I am just about all set here. So I'm gonna put my large brush away. I will take out my medium brush and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're gonna do for the next step is we're doing the first layer of the Inkwell. So I'm gonna be using my medium brush. I'm gonna be using just black paint. So how I'm gonna do this, when I load my brush, I wanna kind of have control over my bristles. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my brush and spin it in the side of my palette to make sure my brush is nice and pointy. And then I'm gonna have my Inkwell sitting on the surface in through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go below this corner of the paper, maybe about an inch or so, and I'm going to draw a very gentle curved line over towards the edge of my canvas that's going to end maybe about an inch before the edge of my canvas over here. And then I'm going to go directly up from the center of here. So come up, 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 and I've got mine maybe, I don't know, an inch or so shorter than here, or a little bit less, but a little bit shorter than the corner of here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a horizontal line that is not as wide as here. You could curve it a little bit if you want to, but curving it on the top side a little bit if you want to. And then once you've got that, what you'll do is just connect this corner to here. And these Inkwells come in all different kinds of shapes, but what I found was that they really kind of buckle out and are bigger at the bottom. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of come down almost horizontally a little bit for maybe about a half of an inch to an inch, and then I'll do like a diagonal type line to meet that bottom corner. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So you can kind of shape yours whatever way that you want, but if you can get both sides to look pretty similar to one another, that would definitely make it look a little bit more realistic. And then once you've got that in there, what I'll do is I'm also going to add another little detail of a little bumped out part of the glass. So something like that, and go to the other side and do a similar bump. And then I'm just going to color it in black. We're going to assume that the ink inside this inkwell is black, because I'm going to have black lettering on my paper. So I will be I'm thinking that this inkwell is just a piece of glass. So you're just seeing all the ink that's inside of it, and it's black ink. And then we're going to be switching, let's see, we're going to use our small brush for the next step. So once you've got your first layer to your inkwell, you can put your medium brush away, take out your small brush, and get ready for the next step. All right, so I know I told you I wanted to use the small brush for the next step, but I don't want to use the small brush. I want to use the medium brush. Sorry about that. So what we're going to be doing is we're doing shadows of the paper on the surface that it sits on. So I'm going to be doing, well, my light source that I'm imagining is up in the right hand side. So my shadows of the piece of paper on the surface is going to be in this corner in through here, maybe a little bit down the side in through here, definitely on the surface down here and underneath this front little edge that's rolling under. So I'm going to be using black and brown paint with my medium brush, and I'm going to use both of those colors on my brush at the same time. And a shadow is meant to look like whatever surface it's on, only darker. So it doesn't have to be 100% black. Some of it can be translucent or see-through, so you can see the purple underneath it. The closer the shadow is to the object, the darker it will be. So I have both colors on my brush, and I may tweak this, make it a little bit lighter or a little bit darker as I go through the process. But I'm going to start with my shadow right in through here. So I've got black and brown on my brush right now, and I'm just kind of bringing it along this edge because I know that this would be casting a shadow from above, and I've got this big area of the paper that would be casting the shadow. So I'm going to bring my shadow down, I would say maybe about a third of the way down the paper, something like that. And then I'm just going to perhaps wipe my brush on my paper towel if I need to, but I'm going to fade this shadow into the wall that it is resting against, or whatever surface it is resting against. And if you want that shadow to travel up a little bit to just indicate that piece of paper does in fact is in fact kind of lifting off in this area, you can certainly do that. Wherever you see a shadow, that's going to tell the viewer that it is lifted away from the surface a little bit. So I've got that in through there. That's looking pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and add my shadow over here on this left hand side. So again, just some black and brown. I think I just picked up a color I didn't want to by accident, so I just wiped my brush off on my paper towel. So this is going to be over here on the left hand side again, and I feel like this piece of paper would probably be lifting off the surface a little bit, but this is going to cast a shadow off to this bottom left. Again, to control my quantity of paint, I have my paper towel ready at all times to make sure I can wipe away any excess paint off of my brush. And I'm just rubbing it into the surface, and I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. And if you bump into your piece of paper, don't worry, because we're going to be adding some ruffled edges in a minute anyways. And I'm going to bring this just up just a little bit to indicate again that it's kind of away from the wall a bit. And then if you feel like you've done too much, you can always add a touch of water to your brush. That will help you to keep that paint moving and also make it a little bit more translucent in areas that you feel that you may want it to be. Then I'm going to add a shadow underneath here. So again, black and brown are on my brush. And this is going to be more of a firm kind of shadow because I know that this line or the edge of this paper would be on the smoother side where it's rolled. So I'm just kind of taking a little bit more time and care as I do this mark right in through here. And I'm going to make it a little bit more narrow as it comes around this corner in through here to indicate that that piece of paper is closer to the surface, and I can make it a little bit wider or thicker in this center area, which would indicate that this part is lifted up off of the surface a little bit higher. So you can play with the visual cues by the size of the shadow. So you can really have some fun with learning how to do stuff like that. And once I've got this on here, now I believe I'm going to be utilizing my small brush for the next step. And I think I really mean it this time. So you can put your medium brush away, take out your small brush, and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we are making our ripped edges of the paper. So I'm going to be using my small brush. The colors that I'm going to be using are my background purple. I'll be using brown. I may end up needing to use some of this color too, and black. So the idea here is we want these edges to look like they're all little torn edges. So if I have a torn edge over here, it's gonna see whatever color's behind it. So we'll start over here with a little bit of our background color, which is the purple, or the warm purple, or whatever you want to call it. And really all I'm going to be doing is arbitrarily just making some little kind of uneven, jagged little marks. Maybe you want it to just look like it's almost rippled. Maybe you want a big kind of tear in it. You might need to, since we know that this purple might be a little translucent, you might need to do a couple of layers in some areas, but just getting as many little marks that you want along the edge. So that's along this edge. I would not do it here because that's the piece of paper that's rolled. I could do a couple in through this area, and they don't all have to be the same. They can come in at different angles. They can be wider. Some can be wider or thinner than the others. It's a tattered old piece of paper, so you can have definitely some different edges to it. I'm gonna have wherever else, since I have my purple on my brush, I'm gonna just do wherever else I feel might have a purple edge to it, which is over here. This is gonna transition into black as well. So I'm just going to do a couple little pieces in through here. I'm going to pick up a touch of black as I come down this side. My background color is going to be black. So again, you can have this as ripply as you want. You do not want to put ripples here because this is going to be a piece that is rolled up. So stop right here and then skip to this area in through here to make it as ripply or as ripped as you want. And I'm just kind of letting my brush do its thing. I'm not really thinking about it too hard. I'm just making sure that I've got some good diversity in my little tears and my marks. Maybe I've got a good size one coming in through here. It can go in far. It can be just a little tiny mark, whatever is, again, visually appealing to you. Feel free to make it that way. I'm going to come all the way down in through here. Maybe these edges down this side just are a little more ripply as opposed to ripped. So again, feel free to make it whatever way looks good to you. And you might, find yourself spending a few minutes just tweaking it and getting it whatever way you want. I might end up coming back with a little bit of purple in this midsection just to show that that's nice and close to the wall on that side, but I don't know yet. I'll give it a couple minutes, see if it tells me I need to do that or not. So I'm making some rips down here, and you don't want to go past this corner down at the bottom, so just get it however tattered you want in through here. And then we've got to somehow get to this scrolly part in through here and in through here. So I'm going to wash my brush, my little brush, and I'm going to start with some brown paint, because what I'm going to do with the brown paint is I'm going to give myself those visual cues and start the edge of this paper. We had a line previously that connected this to here. So that's in essence the front part of the paper rolling up in through there. So that's where I'm going to start. I've got brown paint on my brush. I'm going to give myself a couple of markers so I know, so I have a starting point and an ending point. So I'm going to have my starting point somewhere in through here, and then I'm going to have my ending point somewhere in through here. And from here to here, I know I want to keep it in an arcing motion, something like this, but I want some tears and stuff in it. So I want it to be on the ripply side. So I'm just going to use the point of my brush to kind of make myself a little ripply edge. Here's, maybe I'll have a little tear in through there. And then I, of course, want to make my way down to here. Oops, I had some wet paint on my hand. It's okay, I'll get rid of that in a minute. So I just want to get this edge in through here, making sure that it looks like it belongs to that, and it certainly does. I'm going to get rid of this paint right now with a little bit of water on my brush before it dries too much and I can't get rid of it later. There we go. So you just saw me make a correction. So now that I've got that edge, I'm going to do the same thing to here just so we don't get confused where we're going. What I'm going to first do is I'm going to travel from here to where I had that line going in through here. So I'm going to give myself a slender line just so, again, I have a visual marker. So I'm going to come up from here, and this marker where I'm going should be a tiny bit higher than that one. It doesn't have to be a lot, or a tiny bit lower, sorry. It doesn't have to be a lot lower, just a tiny bit, something like that. And then I'm just going to give myself a slender line from this corner, and it can dip in a little bit too, from this corner to this corner. So something like that is going to give us that visual stopping point. Now, the same exercise that I did here, I'm going to do from here to here. So I'm going to give myself a visual marker. So my ending point is somewhere in through here, and my starting point is right there. So I'm going to give myself a ripply edge to my piece of paper, something like this. And you can keep it at a similar curve as over there. And again, your ripples don't have to be exactly like mine. You can make them, or your tears, whatever you want to consider them to be. You can have yours as accentuated or as gentle as you want. So something like that. Now we need to give it almost the spiral look to the piece of paper. So how I'm going to do this is we'll do this part first. I'm going to come about halfway up this curve, and I'm going to give myself a horizontal line that's going to be maybe about almost half the distance between these two. This is going to represent the bottom part of the scroll, and then I'm going to connect here to here with the exterior of that piece of paper, which is going to look very ripply. You can bring it out pretty far if you want to. Something like this. And it doesn't have to be, again, as ripply as mine. It can be less if you want it to be, but something like that. Then I'm going to come and give myself another little swirl. So this one I'm going to start about here, and this is going to have a little ripple, something like this. I'm not going to do too crazy in the detail. You can see how this is going. At the top of this swirl, I am going to do a horizontal line that's going to connect it to the inside of the piece of paper like that. And I'm going to do a horizontal line from this mark to the inside pieces of paper like that. So I've just created myself a swirl for that piece of paper. I'm going to do the same thing up here, only this I'm not going to have, maybe it will curve in just as much, but I'm going to come up or down about a halfway or a third of the way, and I'm going to give myself a horizontal line that's going to come out about halfway into that vacant space. So something like that. And then I'm going to connect this corner to, I would say maybe somewhere in here. I keep getting my, I hold my hand, I rest my hand on my canvas a lot, and there must be a lot of wet black paint somewhere that I keep putting my hand in. But anyways, so I'm reloading my brush with some more brown paint so I can connect this corner to here with a arcing rippled motion. So something like this. And I'm just, again, giving myself a couple of ripples. Maybe this one comes in like this, or tears in my paper. So that looks good to me. Just reloading with some brown paint. I'm going to give myself another horizontal line about halfway between here, and it's going to come out a little bit farther than the top one. So something like that. And then I'll give myself a rippled edge of the piece of paper that goes something like this. So we just created a mark like that. And then if you have any little tweaks that you know, second coats that you feel that you might need to do in through here, feel free to do that. And then we're going to switch brushes to our large brush for the, no, let's go with our medium brush for the next step. So medium brush, next step, just get ready. All right, so what I'm going to do for the next step is I am adding the shadows onto my paper. I'm going to be using my medium brush, and I'm primarily going to be using brown and the original tan color that we made for the I called it parchment paper. It is. It's an old style parchment paper. When I think parchment paper these days, I think you bake with it. Well, they used to write on it. So I am going to, again, my light source is over on the right hand upper side. So my darkest areas are going to be on the left side. I'm going to have shadows in through here at the bottom, and those are going to dominate where I have the shadows, but I will also have a shadow kind of tucked in at the bottom of this piece of paper. So it's going to be bright up here, and then as it recedes into the canvas, it will be darker down in through here. So I'm going to start with just brown paint on my brush. The biggest trick that I can give you for this step is never have a ton of paint on your brush, especially when you're doing these smaller areas. You can always add more, like I'll probably use a good amount when I get into the larger areas, but when I'm in the smaller areas, I'm just using a teeny tiny bit of paint on my brush. And I will always have my paper towel at the ready just to make sure if I need to do anything, I've got the ability to do so. So I've got just brown paint on my brush right now. I'm going to start rubbing it into where I feel the darkest area would be, which is going to be right in through here. And I feel that this little corner might pop out a little bit. So before I leave this section, I just picked up a tiny bit of my original color with my dirty brush, and I'm going to blend it in. So that made this part of the paper in through here just recede back underneath this. So I'm going to do the same thing for my next section. So my next section I feel that would be really dark is in through here. And if your paper is darker than mine, I suppose you could get away with using a touch of black on your brush, but I feel that I would probably be able to get away with a little bit with just using brown. So this is going to be pretty darn dark up in through here, and this paper, this layer, would probably cast a shadow on this piece here too. So I'm going to pull a little bit of a shadow in through there as well. So something like that. I just picked up a little bit more brown to get this area down here a little bit darker as well. And the brown the more layers that you put with the brown, the darker it will get. So you can progressively get those shadow areas to be darker and darker by just layering on more layers of the brown. So I just picked up some of my original tan color in through here just to make sure that I've got these blended well together. And I might end up adding more of the darkness or more of the lightness as I'm doing this. I still want that edge to look nice and rippled, so I'm not going to take away all of that. And I will end up putting a highlight at the top of this piece of paper as well. So I know that I don't need to get rid of that lightness at the top, but I do want a nice dark shadow in through here. So I'm just kind of continuing to play with it until I feel that it is in fact dark enough. Maybe I would have a tiny bit in through here, but not much. So that's looking pretty good to me. Just work this just a tiny bit more. And again, I'm using a combination of brown and my original tan color. And again, we're going to be putting highlights on in a little bit. So don't worry if it doesn't look exactly perfect at this point, because we will add, like I said, additional highlights that are going to help to make it a little bit more realistic. So I'm just adding a touch more brown in through here because I really feel like this would be the darkest area right in through there. And I'm going to move down to this section using starting with just brown on my brush, getting this little tiny interior section the darkest because it's the furthest inside, so my brain tells me it should be the darkest. And then I'm going to go ahead and put some of that dark brown in through here, knowing that this piece of paper would cast a shadow on this a little bit. So I'm going to put some in through here as well, not a ton, but just a little bit to make sure the illusion is alive, and just getting that in through there. Maybe this has a touch of a shadow at the bottom of it and maybe a little in through there. And then I want to make sure that I've got this shadow blending with the surrounding areas. So I'm going to pick up a touch of my background color just to make sure that I've got enough of a blend. I feel like I need a little bit more shadow in through here. So I'm picking up a little bit of my brown and my background color because I don't want it to go as dark as that first tiny section that I did. And of course you could certainly use a smaller brush for these smaller areas. So wherever your comfort zone is, that's where you should go. You don't have to muscle through a small area with a larger brush like I'm doing. If you're more comfortable with a small brush, feel free to use a small brush. I need to make sure this top shadow makes sense and it doesn't just look like I have an outline around the paper. So I'm going ahead and adding just a bit more shadow in through there. And again, I just keep tweaking it with my brown and my background color. There we go. That's looking pretty good. And then I've got to put my shadow in through here, here, and over in through here as well. So I think I'm going to start over here just because I'm closest to it and I feel like I'm ready for it. I've got brown and my original color on my brush. So I'm just gonna go ahead and almost kind of swish this around here, making it appear a bit darker than the original color. It can be a little bit lighter on the edges. We're gonna be popping a little bit of a highlight on those edges in a little bit anyways. And this shadow is in essence gonna kind of travel over into this area over here. So I'm going to use a little bit of my original color plus brown on my brush to accomplish this shadow. I want it to be darker than my background, but I don't want it to really be the darkest shadow like I have in through here. So you might find yourself manipulating it a little bit. Maybe you need to do more than one coat. You just kind of blend it and get it to work as much as you need to. I am going to blend it up into the original color. So I want this to be a gradual shadow as opposed to just a shadow of an object. I want it to actually fade up as if we are seeing that piece of paper just curving down into this area. So I know that I need to utilize my original background color of my paper in order to accomplish that effect. And I know that my paint will get a little bit darker as it dries, so it looks a little bit light at the moment, but I am not worried about that. I'm adding some more of the brown and the original color over here because I want this to be a little bit darker over here. And then I have a little shadow that I'm going to be adding at the bottom of this piece as well. So I'm just kind of getting this to blend nicely in through here before I move on. That's looking pretty good. Just making sure it's going to blend well at the top. And we are going to also be doing, like I said a minute ago, the highlights for the entire piece of paper. So if you don't have a perfect blend from here to up top, don't worry about it, because when we put the highlight on, we're going to be hitting this midsection again anyways. Plus, this is a really old piece of paper, so there is no need for it to be super perfect at any part, because it can be ripply and wrinkly and it's torn on the edges. So just know that the more weathered it looks, the more natural it's going to look. Like maybe somebody found it in their attic somewhere. Maybe it's a romantic love note from, you know, their grandparents, or their mom wrote it to, you know, their dad years ago. So, you know, just it's meant to be romantic and old, and, you know, just enjoy making this tattered piece of paper. And then we're going to use the same brush for the next step. So once you've got your shadows in place, you can wash and dry this medium brush and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to be doing for the next step is we are adding our highlights to the paper. So I'm going to be using my medium brush, and I'm going to be using white and my original tan color. And if I need to, I will also go into brown as well. So again, my light source is over here. So the majority of my brightest area is going to be at the top of this section where it rolls over, as well as this section where it rolls over. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be at the tippy top. I'm going to have it a little bit of the brightest spot a little away from the tippy top, so that will give the illusion of it being round. I'm also going to have bright edges along that right edge of the paper in through here, as well as a couple of little highlights on these rippled edges, so it almost makes it look like they've been curled up a little bit or have a little bit more texture to them. And I'll do the same thing in through here. I'll add bits of extra highlights at where the paper rolls, as well as at those edges. So I'm going to start with white paint on my brush, and I've got a good amount because I know that I want a big highlight up at this top. So I'm going to just kind of start getting it into place in through here. And I'm not fearful of going too light, because I always can bring back my original color from the start. So I've got my white on my brush, and I know that my white is also a little translucent, so it may end up turning a little bit darker as it dries, so I'm not terribly concerned about that. I'm adding some bright little edges over in through here, and then once I've kind of got it pretty much where I want it to go, now what I'm going to do, this big area at the top, before I go any farther into the rest of my painting, I'm picking up some of this original tan color to get these to blend in together. So you may end up using a combination. I've got both colors on my brush right now, a combination of both colors in order to get them to blend in together. So it's a gradual transition from one color to the next, as opposed to you just having a big bright white area and it not blending with the neighboring color or going gradually. Because I want the illusion to be that this paper is in essence rounded. So in order to accomplish that, I've got to get these colors to blend with one another, as opposed to them being separate from one another. So right now I'm really kind of alternating the original tan color with white in order to get this into the proper balance that I want. I think I want it to be a little bit darker up here in the top left-hand corner of the top of the piece of paper, just to give it a little bit more information that the light source is over on that right-hand side. But I do need these colors to blend, so I'm consciously thinking about that the entire time, that I want them to blend nicely with one another. And you might find that you need to do a couple of different layers to it. You might get it on the first shot. It's, you know, it's gonna be one of those do it, let it dry, and then if you feel like you want to bump it up and make it a little bit brighter or darker, you can certainly do that. And I always recommend, you know, when you're doing a step like this, to, once you feel like you've got it on there and it's looking great, to again just kind of sit on it for a little bit and let it dry. Look at it from a distance. That's going to help you to determine whether or not you want to make any adjustments, because your paint will dry differently. And again, I'm putting these little bits of highlight over on this side just to show that those pieces of paper might be lifted off at the edges a little bit, and just getting this to blend in, making sure I've got this area where I want it to be the brightest, making sure that it really blends nicely and is a gradual type transition from the light to the dark. So that's looking pretty good to me. I want to add a tiny bit of highlight over here. I might be able to get away with just using the remnants on my brush. So, because this to me would catch a little bit of the light from wherever that light source is coming from. So I'm just using a little bit of the remnants on my brush to add bits of highlights on these little corners here. I think I'm going to add a touch right in through here too. And again, you can have it as bright as you want, but to me this would be a little bit darker in through here than this area, just because of where it's located from the light source. Maybe this has a little edge right there too. It's looking pretty good. And again, you can tweak yours as much as you want to in that area. I got to catch this side over here too, so I don't need much over here. I just want to make sure that that transition is appropriate, and that maybe I've got a couple of little edges along the that far right hand side that will catch the bit of the light from the light source. So I'm just kind of going through with my original color right now, making sure that it is blended nice with this highlighted area up and through here. And then I'm going to add, to me, like this little corner here might catch a bit of that, of the light. So maybe I'll put a touch in through here just to show that that's a little rippled edge. And most of this area is going to be hidden by my quill anyways, the feather on my pen. But if I have a little peekaboo spot between the feathers, I definitely still want it to look like I didn't miss that spot while painting. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got this on. That's looking pretty good. I think I might want this area just a smudge lighter in through here, just to make that piece of paper pop out a bit more. You don't want that highlight to just be at the top and stop right there, because I want this piece of paper to look like it's coming out a bit further. So I just bumped this midsection up a little bit by adding a touch more lightness. And then you definitely want to make sure that the transition works. So just keep using your original color as you come down, and then when you get to that shadowed area, if you need to add a bit of the brown just to make sure that it works, that totally is what you should do. So I've got this going on here. That's looking like it's blended pretty well. And then I just have the scrolly part down here that I want to add a bit of highlight to. Yeah, that's looking good. I like making these three-dimensional things. All right, so I've got my brush. I'm just picking up some white paint. I'm going to add my brightest highlight over in this top right-hand corner. And if you needed to adjust your edges of your piece of paper, now's the time to do it, because you're not going to touch this again. And again, my brightest highlight is going to be in through here and not at the edge of it. So I'm putting this white here, and then I'm just going to kind of rub it over towards this left hand side, and that'll give me a pretty good gradual type blend. Right now I'm going to pick up some of my original background color to make sure that this gets on here and blended well enough. And sometimes just re-wetting that area, like right now what I'm doing in my head and on the canvas, but my head is telling me wet this area with your original color, and then you can add a little bit of white on top of that while it's still wet, and that's going to provide you with a really easy way to add a highlight without going totally white. So again, I want the lightest area to be over here on the right, but I still want there to be a highlight going in through this area as well, so it looks like that piece of paper is in fact rounded. So sometimes just again wetting the surface with the original color will help you to add white to it while it's wet, and that'll give you a shade lighter. Or you can blend it, pre-blend it on your palette as well. So that's looking pretty good. I just want to add those bits of lightness over here as I did up in through here. I'm going to catch some of these edges of the paper with a little bit of white to give that torn three-dimensional appearance. And again, this might be a little a learning curve if you haven't done this type of technique before, but just think of it, the pieces that are torn and kind of flipped up a little bit will be catching the light from your light source. So that if you can keep those types of thoughts in mind, that helps you to understand where to put the highlights. So this edge might be also catching a little bit of the light source, and if I want it to look like it's popped up a little bit, just get it a little bit lighter than this area. And then this inside edge would probably have a little bit as well, because that might be catching just a smudge. So I'm just adding a bit in through there, making sure that it blends in with whatever color I had done originally, and then I'll probably add a tiny bit of a highlight right along this little area. And it doesn't have to be much when you're doing these little fine details. You don't need much to give a good effect. And then let's see, what are we going to do for the next step? We are going to use our small brush for the next step. So once you've got all of your beautiful three-dimensional highlights on your piece of paper, you can get your large brush, or excuse me, your small brush ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we're doing the first layer of our pen or our quill. I'm going to be using my small brush, and I'm going to be using black paint only. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to just kind of put the pen itself in place. My feather is going to have a lot of movement to it, so my feather is going to be more free flowing, but I need to have that stable place to start. So I'm going to start with a diagonal line. So I know that my pen is going to be sitting in my Inkwell, so in through here. So you want to make sure that it kind of makes sense. You don't want it to be this way, or something that wouldn't make sense. So just use an object as your guide. So if you want it to be here and to rest inside the Inkwell, it's got to come out something along this line for an angle. And I want mine to be really pretty tall. So first I'm just going to make myself a little marker in through there. And if I want mine to be pretty tall, I'm just going to kind of follow this angle and just make sure that it makes sense. Is that going to make sense? Yep. And I want my quill to go into my paper. So I'm going to make my line somewhere in through here So this is a little bit below this piece of paper mark here, just so you have a gauge as to where I'm going with mine. And I'm going to make myself just a diagonal line going from one marker to the next. And if you make it a little bit crooked, it's okay, because we're gonna tweak it in a minute, and we've got a big huge feather that's going to be disguising any imperfections that we may have. So I want a little part where for the handle on the pen, or the actual pen part itself. So you can really make this as decorative as you want. I'm just going to kind of do a shape right now that is going to be a little bit larger at the top and a little bit more narrow as it goes into my inkwell. So I'm going to just go up maybe like 2 or 3 inches, somewhere in, I would say, this vicinity. Make myself a diagonal line, because that's the diagonal, or the way that the pen is. And then I'm just going to make myself some kind of decorative little swirly line on one side, and do the same or something similar on the other side, like that. And then just color it in black. So I'm just coloring this in with black. The next thing that I'm going to do, if you need to adjust the width of the feather, gosh, I'm not feeling very smart right now. The stem to the feather, the feather. Oh, I should have looked. Sometimes as I'm painting, I really wish that I had looked up certain words, but I didn't even think to look it up. So the center part of a feather, I'm sure, maybe that's the quill part. Maybe that's what it's called, the center part. I don't know. I'm sure somebody will look it up for me. So we've got that center part. We'll call it a quill, and we're going to cross our fingers if that's the right terminology. If you want to or need to, you can widen that a little bit, but I'm going to have my feathers, the fluffy part is going to start pretty close to where you would be holding it. But I want this to have a lot of movement, so I'm going to take my black paint and start the direction of where I want this to go. So I'm going to travel this up in a diagonal kind of motion in through here, and then I'm going to drop it back down, because I want this to have a lot of motion to it. So it's going to be flopped over is what I'm going to do. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add a bit of water to my black paint. So I've got my small brush, and I'm just adding droplets of water to my black paint, because I want my black paint right now to be of an ink consistency, which is very appropriate for our painting, so I can have nice fluid motion as I am building my feather part of the pen. And I want my pen the feather part to be very flowy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little bit away from here. I'm going to have a very free type brush stroke, but I know that if I don't put a couple of distinct pieces in to start, my brain sometimes will, or my hand tends to take over and not be as I want it to be. It just gets too excited, and my hand is like, just make 1,000, and it doesn't matter what direction. So I have to slow down when I start in order to put these distinct pieces in. So I've got a couple started down here. Now I want my feather part, that center part, to almost kind of come up and flip over. So I want all of these little pieces of feathers to come in this direction. And again, I'm using watered down black paint. I'm not covering it 100% because I really want to be able to detect that center line. And I'm using black as almost my shadowy effect of the colored pieces of feather that I'm going to be putting on later. So I'm considering this to just be like a base coat for my feather. And so if it's not as full as you had hoped it would be or want it to be, don't worry. This is just the part that is going to give us the base for it. So now this is where my feather starts to flip over. So I'm going to consider this to be, everything from here is kind of bending in a downward and flipped out kind of motion. Even out here, if I want this to come out a little bit further, I've got them down and out, and my longest one is going to be in the center of those. So something like that. And this is going to give you a bunch of movements. So I'm going to have shorter ones as it comes up in through this area, and then those longer ones as it comes down here. When I was doing this the first time, because this is the second time I painted this, this reminds me of like a ponytail for a girl that's just kind of flopped over and is, you know, just kind of flowing in the wind. So that's how I'm interpreting this in my head, or how I'm seeing it in my head as a female ponytail. And once I've got this all on here and I've got these in the direction that I want, again, you can see I'm not overdoing it. I really just kind of want to have this light and airy kind of appearance for these, but I want to make sure that I've got a good base for when I add the colored part on in a minute. So I am just going to continue to, right now my brush is kind of doing its own thing, but I'm definitely trying to maintain the idea that this is it's flopping over in through here. If you want to make it fuller or whatever, you can certainly do that. But I'm thinking that's looking pretty good to me. Maybe a couple more in through here. And this is an imaginative feather for me. I didn't model it after any distinct feathers, so you can certainly feel free to make yours whatever way that you would like. And then we're going to use this same brush for the next step. So once you've got the base coat on your quill, you can wash and dry that small brush and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we are finishing our inkwell as well as the handle part for the pen and a shadow on the ground. So I'm going to use my small brush, and the colors that I'm using are brown, black, and white. And how I'm going to start this is I'm going to start it with black and white on my brush at the same time, because I want to add the dimensional elements to the inkwell itself. So I'm going to have mine appear to be on the rounder side. So I've got black and white on my brush, and I'm going to be doing a partial oval at the top of my inkwell. Let me just add a touch more black on my brush. I don't want this to go all the way white because I do want to add that another element later. So this is going to be black and white are on my brush right now, and I'm giving myself a little edge. And if you feel like it's too bright, like I feel like mine's too bright, I'm just adding a touch more black to my brush, because I really just want this to be kind of the subtle makings of the dimensional elements. I want a brighter highlight in a minute, so I'm holding back on my brightness. This little bump that comes out here, I'm going to add a little line on top of that to tell you that protrudes. I'm going to add a little, maybe we've got another little highlight in through there. Maybe I've got one here. I'm going to add a bit of a highlight down this left-hand side. So this again is just black and white on my brush right now. Going to make this look a little bit curved down here. Maybe this is a reflection of the piece of paper. You could certainly pull in some of that color if you wanted to. So something like that. I think I'm going to have a big reflective area in the glass itself, more so to tell the viewer the shape of the glass. So I'm going to give this illusion with a little bit of a curved line. That's going to help to tell the viewer that this is a curved object, and it might be reflecting something that's off in the distance, maybe a light or a window or something along that line. So something like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up just white paint on my brush right now, and I'm going to add a bit more of, now's where I'm going to add that brighter kind of little twinkle along these edges maybe something like that. I've got a little piece in through here, and then I've got a bright edge down in through here. This doesn't even have to be right along the edge. You can be near the edge. This can be a reflection, or maybe we're seeing through the glass. I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm just adding some strategic bright spots that are going to help to sell the story. And then what I'm going to do with this guy is I'm going to be using, this is where I'm going to use a little bit more brown. So I've got brown and white on my brush right now. I'm going to add some more decorative little elements for this. And for me, of course, the right side is going to be the brightest. I think I'm just going to add a little bit of this brown in through here. Maybe there's a little part that pops out there. And again, I'm just having fun with this and imagining this. Maybe this has a little bit of wood on it or something, so we can use that brown a bit more to make it look like there's maybe a little wood, or maybe it's reflecting the paper itself. You can certainly have fun with this also. And I'm going to just make this right hand side a little bit lighter. Yeah. See, I'm just having fun with my details. You don't really need to do a whole heck of a lot. Adding a touch of white to my brush right now just to give the information that maybe it's something shiny and it's reflecting the, from whatever light source there is. So that's gonna work out for me there. Maybe a little bit down here as well. And then if you want there to be the illusion, a further illusion of the pen going into the inkwell, just bring these lighter colors down past that back edge of the inkwell itself. And that's going to tell the viewer that it's going inside that particular object. And then we are going to be using, we need to make our shadow down here. Almost done. I'm going to be using same brush, just a little bit of watered down black and white, and I want my shadow to be similar to what I have here, but I don't need it to be that big of a spot. So I'm just putting maybe a little bit more black on my brush, on this floor or on the table, whatever this object is that it's resting upon. And then I'm just going to make sure that this shadow kind of travels out a bit. I think I need a little bit more black on my brush. There we go. And because we have that gray highlight that we added on the inkwell, that helps to show the edge of that particular object. And if you wanted to see the edge even more, you could add more of a gray type color. And if your shadow doesn't work out quite the way that you had planned, you can always go back into your background color and use that to correct it, or to dull it down, or to make it blend a little bit further. And then we are going to be using our medium brush for the next step. So once you've got your inkwell and your pen all nice and painted in, you can put your small brush away, take out your medium brush, and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we are adding the shadow of our inkwell and pen onto the paper. So I'm going to be using my medium brush, and I'm going to be using brown and black and water. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to have the inkwell casting a shadow on this portion of the paper. It's going to be wider at the bottom, more narrow at the top, and it's going to be curved, so it takes on the curve of the piece of paper. And then I'll have just the stem of my pen, as well as the fluffy part, casting a shadow on the paper itself. I'm going to be using watered down paint, so it's translucent. And I know that if I make it too translucent, I can always add more, but it's really difficult to take off of the paper once it, or off of the, well, we're painting on the paper, but off of the canvas once it's on there. So I caution you to just, use it more watered down to start. And if it's too light, just let it dry for a minute and put another layer on it. So I've got my medium brush. I have black and brown paint. I'm going to use both colors. You might get away with just black or just brown. You can certainly test it out if you want to, but I've got both colors and I'm dropping some water in it. So that way it is definitely watered down. I know, again, that I can always add more, but it's really tough to take away once it's on there. So I've got it watered down. I'm going to actually just kind of pat my brush on my paper towel, and I'm going to start maybe about 1 inch away from the right hand side on the bottom, and maybe about 1.5 inches to 2 inches up at the top. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of a curved line. I'm going to come over to the left, maybe about 2 or 3 inches, and maybe about 1 inch from here, and do myself another kind of curved line. So it's in essence kind of more narrow at the top than it is at the bottom. And then I'm going to color it in. So I want to try and avoid it looking like there's an outline around the edges, which is why I'm using the watered down paint, so I can just kind of keep manipulating it as it's drying. And if I need to, I can grab a little bit more water, in essence, too, on my brush if I need to soften those edges a little bit. But this is looking pretty good. I'm just going to kind of keep softly rubbing it as it's drying, just so I can get the look that I desire. And I just keep adding a touch of water onto my brush to soften these little edges a bit. And then once I've got this looking the way that I want, yeah, that's looking pretty good. I'm hardly touching my canvas right now. I'm really just lightly touching it as if it's like a feather. So once I've got that done, I'm going to do the same thing for this guy in through here, but I'm going to come to the left of this shadow, maybe I would say about 1/2 inch or so, and that's where I'm going to start it. I want it to curve with the piece of paper. So I'm going to kind of watch this edge in through here, but I also know that it is kind of tipped too, so you don't have to follow this exactly, but if you can get a little bit of a curve to the shadow, that'd be awesome. So I'm going to go something like this. And then as I go up, I'm going to watch these in through here and just give myself something that is similar, but I know that I'm coming at a different angle too. So it doesn't have to be a mirror representation, but if I can capture some of those little characteristics that I've got going on that feather in through there, that'd be awesome. I also know I've got another layer that's going to happen on my feather in a minute, so this is really just kind of getting the illusion in place. Even though I still have another layer on that, I just felt that it would be an easier task to perform before we did the colors on the actual feather. So you can see I'm just really having this nice and free form in through here. I know that it's going to go underneath that guy and through there. So my light source is pretty high up in the air, so I'm not going to have this travel much further than here. So just making sure I've got a little bit more in through here. And then we are going to be using this medium brush for the next step. So once you've got your shadow on here, you can wash and dry this medium brush and get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we are finishing the feather part of our pen. I'm going to be using my medium brush. The colors that I'm using are red, yellow, and white. And you might find you want to use purple or brown or more black. You just feel free to make this whatever way that you would like. How I'm going to build it is I'm going to start with my red paint, because that's going to take on varying shades because it's nice and see-through or translucent. So it'll be a little bit brighter as it comes in front of here, and it'll go a little bit darker over here. So I'll do my base with red, and then I'll start to build some highlights with my yellow and my white, and I'll also end up at some point putting a little highlight down this part of the feather. So I'm going to start with a red paint on my brush. Now as I'm doing this, I know that I do not need to just stay on the black. So I'm going to also bring some of this color outside of the black area. So that way you'll be able to have many different shades of the red as it dries. You'll have some darker spots from underneath where the black is, and then some lighter spots as it is on top of the lighter areas. And I'm just going to flick out some of the feather parts along the edges to give authenticity to the shadow that we have going on. But once I reach this internal area where it's going to start coming around the bend, I don't need it to be too bright, because in my head that would be shadowed underneath there. So I'm going to leave that a little bit darker. I might add a touch of brown or something in through there just to make sure that that stays on the darker side. And then as I'm coming down here, I don't need to cover up all of my black pieces 100%. This is, I mean, the red will show the black through it, but you can leave some of those black pieces without paint on top of them. They're in essence kind of meant to look like shadows, so you can certainly leave some of them visible, because they could be shadowing on the wall, they could be shadowing on another piece. And I do know that the red will turn darker as it dries, so I'm not terribly concerned at how vibrant it is at this point. I will again know that it will turn a little bit darker. I think I am going to put a touch of brown on my brush in this little area here. I feel like it's going to go a bit too, there's a bit too many peekaboo spots for me, so I just want that to be a little bit darker in through there. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start picking up some yellow paint, and I'm going to start transitioning into some more highlights. I didn't wash my brush. I'm just going to add a bit of gentle brightness on the edges of this particular part of the feather, and then I'll be a little bit more bold with it coming in through here. So I've got a little bit more of the yellow on my brush. I really just kind of want this to almost as if the tips are being caught by the light, so something like that. Maybe I'll do some up in this top area as well, just to give you that full movement of the feather itself. And I'm going to add a little bit of white in a minute here, but first I'm just kind of getting these into place. That's looking pretty snazzy. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just wipe my brush off on my paper towel, pick up a teeny bit of white paint, give myself a little bit of a highlight coming down this center of our feather, and that's just going to lead the viewer to understand that it is that center part. I'm wiping my brush off on my paper towel. I'm picking up a little bit of brown. This is a touch too vibrant to me, so I just want to dull it down just a smudge with a bit of brown. So that's how I did that. And now I'm going to pick up a little bit more white paint to add that extra bit of highlight up on the top of this feather. So you might find that you might need to wait a minute to get this feather to dry a bit. Sometimes when we do these back-to-back colors right in a row, it might get a little too muddled for you. I just wiped my brush and picked up a little bit of red. I feel like I need a couple more feathers in through here. So if you find that that happens to you, that it's getting a little bit too muddled for you, you can certainly wash and dry your brush, and or just wait for it to dry a minute. Sometimes letting the paint dry a minute will help you to accomplish those quick, swift little brush strokes that will add those dimensional elements to it. That's looking pretty good. I was going to keep going, but I'm like, I think it looks good the way that it is. So we're going to use our small brush for the next step. So once you've got your feather looking the way that you'd like it to, you can get your small brush out and just get ready for the next step. All right, so what we're going to do for the next step is we are writing our message on our piece of paper. So you can feel free to write whatever kind of message you want. I'm going to kind of leave this open to the viewer's interpretation. So I'm just going to write to my ... So it could be to my Valentine, it could be to my hubby, it could be to my sweetheart, it could be to my love, it could be to my mom, it could be to my anything, really. So I'm going to leave my painting up to the interpretation of who's ever looking at it, so they can plug in whatever they'd like. But if you'd like to make yours into something meaningful to yourself, feel free to do so. So I'm going to be using my small brush. I'm going to be using watered down black paint. I know that I've designated the ink in my Inkwell to be black, but I want to have a nice fluid brush stroke as I'm doing this, so I'm going to be using watered down black paint. You could certainly draw yours out with your pencil, so that way you can have the placement exactly where you want, but I'm one of those just kind of go for it kind of artists, so I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna use it with some watered down black paint, and once I get that first coat on, if I feel like I want to do a second coat to make it more solid, I can certainly do that. But right off the bat, I'm just going to be using some watered down black paint. I'm going to have mine somewhere in this vicinity. And if I can, it might not happen exactly as I planned, but I'm going to try and get my letters to be a tiny bit smaller as I go towards the right-hand side to provide a little more illusion for the story here. So I'm going to just I'm just going for it. So I've got my T first. So I've got 2. And of course you can make your letters as fancy as you like or as simple as you like. Sometimes when I'm teaching these classes where people are doing words, I usually recommend that you use your own penmanship. That's the easiest way to do this, or practice, practice on a piece of paper or something nearby. So we've got the word to, and then I've got to put this a little bit further away and see if I can get it to go a little bit smaller as I do this. To my, like that, and maybe we'll bring this up a bit, and then we have ... and then we have one tiny little step left to go, and it's going to be with this small brush. So once you've got your message on your paper, you can wash and dry the small brush and get ready for the next step. All right, so we are on to the final step. This is the final step of every painting, which is to sign it. So I usually sign mine in the bottom left or the bottom right spot. I suppose if you did a whole message, you could have just signed it within that piece of paper, but I didn't. So I'm going to sign mine in the bottom left. I'm using my small brush. I am using black paint. I usually sign my name or sign my paintings with my initials, but you could certainly sign yours with your first name or the date or a symbol or whatever you want to be your identifying mark is totally fine. And that is going to conclude this painting. I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope you painted yourself a really special romantic image, and I look forward to painting and sipping with you again sometime.